Hello everybody, my name is Evelin Lindner. I'm the founding president of the Human Dignity and Humiliation Studies Network, and here is Linda Hartling, our director. And I would like to ask you, Linda, if you could explain to us your work with Jean Baker-Miller and the theory, the relational approach that you together have developed.
Thank you, Evelyn. I'm really delighted to be here and to be able to talk about this topic that is so close to my heart. Yes, we have been, with your help and your support and your understanding, Evelyn, we've been shaping the Human Dignity Humiliation Studies Network on a premise of relational practice, of relational thinking that informs our community building through our network that we think has important implications for looking at relationships in the larger world. And let me just tell you a little bit about this. As you know, I spent 10 years working with Jean Baker-Miller, who is a legendary psychiatrist who worked with a small group of scholars at Wellesley College looking at theories of psychological development. And when I first started, people talked about psychological development from this sort of Western individualist framework, proposing that the outcome of healthy development is to separate from relationships, become more independent, more self-sufficient, more autonomous. Well, these small group of scholars realized that this tended to pathologize relational behaviors, and they began developing a different perspective, which is known today as relational-cultural theory. And this theory proposes that all human beings grow in and toward relationships throughout their lives, that the outcome of healthy development is a desire for better or more connections as opposed to separation and independence. So this is a very sort of a radically relational approach. And the good news is that neuroscience today is telling us that we need relationships in our lives just as we need air, food, or water. So it turns out that this is a very strong field of study that's moving beyond that traditional view of the individual as the unit of science to looking at relationships as a unit of study. And when we talk about relationships and relational cultural theory, we aren't talking about we're talking about certain qualities in relationships that facilitate the growth or provide for the growth of all people involved. Our friend Dot Mavers, who's with the National Peace Academy, gave us this wonderful term, developing a science of right relationships. And I think that's very helpful because, as you know, our work is about looking at creating equality and dignity in relationships, which is our general definition of what is a right relationship. Jean Baker-Miller and her colleagues describes the importance of mutual empathy in relationship and mutual empowerment and mutuality, which is not to be misunderstood as like an equal exchange, like you give me something and I'll get something back. Mutuality is really about both people engaging in a way that provides for the growth of each person, even if they grow in completely different ways. So we've integrated this kind of relational logic in our work by formally saying that relationships come first. It's how we engage in relationships that leads to the growth of the work in human dignity humiliation studies. And that wouldn't be possible if you weren't a cultural relational bridge builder around the world. Has really been a pioneer in bringing this relational perspective into the world, Evelyn. So I have to say, you're a great inspiration for taking this initiative.
And I usually say that the African philosophy Ubuntu is a good description of our relationship, because also I would not be able to do our work without you. So we depend on each other in this. Our relationship is kind of the basis, the foundation of our work.
Yes.
And Ubuntu philosophy says, I am because of you. And this is what connects us.
Yes, this is what connects us. And I think that's what has kept our work together and our work with so many others that have contributed to the Human Dignity Humiliation Studies Network alive and energized. And I think one of the things that comes out of Jean Baker Miller's work that's been very helpful for me for thinking about how important relationships are is her idea of the outcomes of these types of relationships. Now, I think it's important to know that relational cultural theory is not a static, frozen type of theory that most people think of. It's kind of an evolving theory that continues to grow and change as more people get involved. But Jean had some very helpful tips about what we were looking for in finding energizing relationships that contribute to growth. And she called those the 5 good things. So just briefly, when we are in those types of relationships, which I think describes our relationship, we feel a sense of energy or zest in the relationship, which leads to empowerment to take action on behalf of ourselves, on behalf of other people, on behalf of the relationship itself. That leads to greater clarity or knowledge about our relationship and our work in the world for all people. That leads to a greater sense of worth for both people in the relationship and a desire for more connection. So those are those 5 good things that we see as those might be a key to understanding the value of relationships, not only in our work, but in our work in the world.
Yes, and I think that what we create together is of a more substance than if we were to go the traditional way of thinking that only a strong leader can do, productive work, or who is, alone, gives commands to his followers or her followers, or also that somehow that relationships are soft and being independent is to be hard, or also the product of our work is different. People sometimes ask us, what are you doing? And then they expect the classical, traditional, okay, we have this project, we have raised $5 million, and we are bringing wells to this village where the women have to carry the water. Somehow our approach is much, much larger. We are like nudging the entire culture of our world society, you could say. We nudge this culture into a more relational direction, and also we advocate to value this relationship building work as being extremely valuable, more valuable than anything else. Yes. Especially today in this interdependent, interconnected world, where relationship building and cooperation is the only thing that can help us build a sustainable future.
Yes, I think that whole point about how relational work is real work, and it is the very work that supports and keeps society healthy and also leads us to new possibilities for the future. And
it is not avoiding conflict.
No.
It is not simply putting on rosy glasses or just lucky go happy, or if you just smile and think positive thoughts, everything will be positive. It has nothing to do with that.
No. In fact, Jean Baker Miller was the first to say that part of engaging in relationship is gaining the capacity to wage good conflict, to really be engaged in representing oneself in an authentic way, and to engage difference in a dignifying way that leads the relationship to a new understanding, greater clarity, and ideally to better connection. So relationships are built on authentic connection and the ability to engage in waging good conflict, as opposed to what we typically see on TV as failed conflict. those kinds of engagements. So our group is our special community for learning how to engage in dignifying ways, as Mike Miller says, to encourage dignifying dialogue and to really allow people the conditions that brings about their best contribution to the work.
Yes, and it brings also more clarity. This is our experience also in our workshops and conferences. In classical academic contexts, people want debate.
Oh yes.
And our experience is that this traditional approach does not bring the optimum of clarity.
That's so true, because I think the research even talks about that social evaluative threat, which is also often associated with debate, can shut the conversation down, and people will protect themselves and defend themselves, and so they have their energy going into that kind of activity rather than the activity of co-creating, engaging, building something new. And that's what makes our community a unique experience, in that we invite people to join us in co-creating the relational conditions that allow people to bring their best work, their ideas to the table in a way that's dignifying for all.
Yes.
So thank you, Evelin.
Thank you, Linda.